Most importantly, surrender to your type to the utmost degree so that there's no other actor who is better at playing that type than you. There's nothing wrong with that either. As a certain stage in your development, and then begin to work on transformation, on genuine, organic, creative transformation.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am Nolan Hennelly. I'm an actor and voiceover artist in New York City. And also, I'm currently a teacher in training with the Demidov Association. And with me is another teacher in training, and that is Kimon Fioretos. Kimon.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kimon Fioretos. I'm living in Athens, Greece. I'm an actor and an acting teacher. And I'll pass the ball to Andrei, probably.
Yes, of course, joining both of us is Andrei Malayev-Babel, head and certifying master teacher of the Demidov Association, director of the MFA acting program at the FSU Oslo Conservatory for Actor Training, and the editor of Becoming an Actor Creator, the first English edition and translation of the books of Nikolai Demidov. You know, Andrei, I was wondering if before we begin, for those who might be listening who know nothing about Demidov's work and legacy, would you say just a couple of words about him and this work that we're going to be talking about?
Absolutely, absolutely, Nolan. And it's true. Probably quite a few of our listeners may not know who Demidov was, is, because his school continues to live today. Demidov is a revolutionary acting teacher who created a school of acting that is built on principles that are different from Stanislavski's fundamentals. I think that's the most important thing to mention. Why? Because every acting technique I know of, not only method acting, that is obviously following Stanislavski directly, but all other acting techniques that I know of, whether they want it or not, whether they admit it or not, are built on certain fundamental principles introduced by Konstantin Stanislavski, influential Russian acting teacher, director, producer, theoretician, a man who first decided to create that science of acting. How can art have science behind it, right? But nevertheless, of course, art also has science behind it. So Stanislavski was the first. Demidov was Stanislavski's associate for over 30 years, the closest perhaps, and the longest certainly. The first head of the Moscow Art Theater School, the first and original editor of Stanislavski and Actor Prepares, which continues to be an acting Bible today, for better or worse, right? And finally, a man who, in close collaboration with Stanislavski, by the way, credited Demidov with co-creating the Stanislavski system, being influential to the creation of so-called Stanislavski system, that in America is called method and has been very influential when it comes to other acting techniques. And so Demidov at some point in the mid-1920s disagreed with Stanislavski on the fundamental principles of the so-called Stanislavski system. And then it took Demidov another several decades to create his own school. That school was artificially silenced after Demidov passed away in 1953, and I had an honor of recreating it in our century, in the 21st century. But that's a separate story. This is what I would like to say about Demidov in a nutshell.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a separate story. It's a good story, but it's not what we're talking about today. We've actually kind of bullied Andrei into talking about something else today. We wanted to talk about something that was what we thought was kind of close to the, you know, the worries, the concerns, the everyday thoughts of working actors and acting students as well across the world. And today, that's about typecasting, actor type, kind of sometimes a dreaded word. So we're going to jump right into that today. And Kimon, I was wondering if you could start us off with kind of a big picture question about type.
Absolutely. And I did find a couple of definitions that I wanted to go through you guys both. One is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary and says typecast, to cast an actor or actress in a part calling for the same characteristics as those possessed by the performer, to cast an actor or actress repeatedly in the same type of role. And then we have the definition by the Oxford Dictionary, assign an actor or actress repeatedly to the same type of role as a result of the appropriateness of their appearance or previous success in such roles. And I just wanted to bring up the definition because not many people know what typecasting is, or they do know and they worry. And Andre, I wanted to start with this question. Is this the casting director's fault by not being, I don't know, imaginative enough, able to see beyond that first impression? Is that the industry's fault? They find something that they believe it's, marketing enough, it's like a brand, and then they're selling this and they're not risking it? Or is it the actor's fault, failing to kind of transform, always being in their comfort zone and not finding a way to get out of it because they keep getting employed by the same type, in a sense?
All three. I think it is all three. It is definitely an actor's fault because that actor is comfortable playing a certain version of themselves. By the way, Demidov insists that it's not playing yourself. You know about these actors who are constantly the same on screen, on stage. Sometimes they say, oh, she's playing herself, he's playing himself. And Demidov is very clear, no, they're not playing themselves. They're playing a certain version of themselves that they're comfortable playing. Sometimes it's the same version they present to humanity in everyday life, publicly. But if you ask somebody close to them, oh, is she like that in everyday life? Is he like that in everyday life as they appear on the screen, on stage? People close to these actors who are constantly typecast or prefer to be playing that same type, these people who are close to them will always say, oh, no, she's nothing like that. He's nothing like that. So it's not playing yourself. That's one thing that Demidov kind of makes very clear. It is playing a certain persona that they are comfortable playing or that the industry wants them to play, right? The directors want them to play and so on and so forth. So the industry does it for a very good reason. Because if you begin to recognize a certain actor in a certain type, you now begin to associate certain characters and human beings with that type, right? And that actor doesn't need to do much. All they need to do is show up on the screen, and you already are scared because, in the previous movie, they killed 300 people, right? And they didn't even blink. So, right, so you're beginning to associate certain actor with certain role, and obviously it's good. You know that the industry, when an actor would deviate from a role and do a movie that is different from their regular type, sometimes would buy that independent movie and shelve it, would prevent it from actually appearing because they didn't want that actor to associate with anything else but certain type. So certainly industry, certainly casting directors who work for the industry very often. I'm not saying that there are no artists among casting directors, there are plenty, who are thinking out of the box, right? Who are thinking in an innovative, progressive, non-traditional way. But yeah, if they're constantly typecasting everyone, they're probably catering to the industry. Maybe they believe it themselves. So all three, I would say, Kimon.
Yeah. I think the fourth question would be, is that also the fault of specific acting schools and very specific acting thought? I found a quote that I would like to run it by you, Andre, from a very known acting teacher in LA, and he teaches a very known technique. I don't need to name names, and they teach in a very known school. Again, I don't need to name names, but one of the things that they said was everybody comes to Hollywood and New York, and they come and they want to become somebody else. And what they find out pretty soon is that it's not about becoming somebody else. It's about stepping into who you are 100% and using who you are, because that's the best you can be. You are unique, you are individual, your voice has meaning. And I love the end. It says, you're unique, you're individual, your voice has meaning. But it always kind of reminds me because it sounds like as the first part, the notion that everybody wants to become somebody else, but that's not it, kind of reminds me the saying by Michael Chekhov, who used to say that all true artists bear within themselves a deeply rooted and often unconscious desire for transformation.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it seems like every school of thought kind of kills that notion. For me, that young actor that came to New York, that went to LA and thought that he's going to become something else, well, he got it right in a sense. We're talking about transformation. And because of a very certain school of thought or a very specific narrative in that school, that notion was killed, suppressed.
Because the art of transformation can be lost. Not every technique necessarily knows how to help an actor to become someone else without losing their creative individuality. What's really helpful about Demidov is that he demystifies a lot of things and he makes certain things very clear. I never met another acting teacher who called it as it is and made it so crystal clear. He divides between your creative individuality and your persona. Your persona is how you're comfortable dressing, how you're comfortable carrying yourself, how you're comfortable speaking, right? And therefore, that's what you radiate. In everyday life, you radiate your persona because you've been practicing that persona for as long as you lived, for decades. You're pretty good at being that persona. Look at me. I radiate what I radiate. I dress the way that I dress. I speak the way that I speak. So would you cast me as a truck driver? Probably not, right? Would you cast me as, I don't know, a tough guy? Probably not. Would you cast me as, you see what I mean? So would you cast me as a university professor? Yeah. You sure would, right? So maybe because I am a university professor and an acting teacher. And so that's the role I play in everyday life. That's the role I play in public. And obviously, that's not the only role that I'm playing and comfortable playing. We have perhaps several, but that's perhaps the best rehearsed one. Needless to say, to cast somebody in a role that is best rehearsed because they've been playing it for almost as long as they lived is very tempting. They're good at it, right? They don't have to be directed. You don't have to rehearse it with them. That's your persona, narrow and very limited everyday persona. Your creative individuality, however, is something else entirely. Because your creative individuality is very generous. And it is so rich. It has so many facets, and it is capable of transformation. So if we are talking about being true to your creative individuality, that doesn't exclude transformation. If we are talking about being true to your everyday persona, then yes, that excludes transformation. In terms of transformation, the art has been lost in a lot of contemporary acting techniques to the degree that I was once talking to a colleague who tolerated me for many, many years. Right? Because, of course, I did things differently. I did things the way that nobody else did, whether I was directing, teaching, and so on. In 2008, I switched to Demidov, and since then, I never went back or looked back because Demidov answered a lot of questions for me. So this colleague of mine, my superior at the time, finally got very angry with me in one conversation and said, "I'm sorry, Andre, but I don't happen to believe in God." They were an atheist, right? And for them, transformation basically equaled miracle. And because they didn't believe in miracles, they didn't believe in God, right? They didn't believe in transformation. You see where we live today. That transformation is apparently not something that belongs to the art of acting, but is a God's miracle, apparently.
You know, it's such an incredible story. And It's such a strange thing because when I think about the idea of transformation, I actually think about to when I started acting when I was a really young man, when I was in high school and no one was trying to teach me to act. I was just stumbling and bumbling and making mistakes and had these moments not of just emotionality on stage that people often, have an emotional moment. They say they got bit by the bug, but of transformation, of really losing yourself, but not losing control, experiencing that transformation, but it being very hard to maintain, not knowing how and when it would happen, and moving on to later training thinking, well, surely this will be about how to maintain that transformation. This will be about how to do it, and being sort of heartbroken to find out that the prevailing belief was there is no transformation, there is no character, and feeling like my most artistic moments, my most true moments were a part of transformation. And not only, I think, Andre, do people think of it as an impossible miracle, I wonder, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts on this, do they sometimes have the idea of transformation confused with people doing imitation?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Probably that's the whole thing, right? Absolutely. I know how to imitate somebody. I know how to pretend being someone else. And yeah, that is doable. But it's always going to be a little bit fake, right? Because you are not really going to become that person. On the other hand, what do you mean become this person? How can I become someone else? I am who I am. For me to become someone else, it would have to be a case of amnesia, a case of some kind of psychiatric disease, right? Where people actually do abandon their everyday personality, right? Before they know it, they live in a different city, they marry to a different person, they have a family with someone else, only to wake up one day and remember that they're somebody else entirely, right? So that's a psychiatric case. However, there is another transformation, artistic transformation, that even if it feels and looks miraculous, because some actors do become unrecognizable on stage. There was a Russian actor who played a role that of a person who was much older than him when he was in his 20s. His mother came to the performance and she was invited because, he was starring. She sat through the first act, and at the end of the first act, in the intermission, she asked some of his colleagues, she said, when is my son going to come out? They said he has this important role in the play, but he hasn't come out yet, and we're halfway through the show. She did not recognize her son on stage, right? Can you imagine that? So yes, there are actors who transform completely. There are actors who can transform inwardly more than outwardly, and nevertheless, they do become a different human being. On the other hand, what does it mean to become a different human being? I'm very sorry, Nolan, are you only one person at every point in your life? Of course not. You're very different with different people, right? You're very different in different circumstances. You're very different even during different times of day. Look at you when you just woke up, right? And look at you in the middle of the day when you are, I don't know, teaching, right? These are two very different people, probably. Different voice, different posture, different. So there is also that. Think about all of these people who live inside us, our different facets. We have a saint, we have a villain, right? We have a good guy, a bad guy. We really have so many different people who live within us, and an actor of all people certainly does. So there is also that. And then there is something else. Peter Brook once said, and I worked very hard to confirm it. Finally, I had to go to Peter Brook himself because I could not find any of that quote anywhere, so I could actually quote it credibly. And so he once said, for the most part on stage, on screen, I see imitation. Very rarely I see transformation. And very rarely, almost never, I see, I think he said, transfiguration or reincarnation. You see what I mean? Now, that's Demidov.
Yeah.
That is where Demidov is heading. Something that is really greater than transformation, even that complete immersion, that transcending of oneself, that almost otherworldly experience of becoming someone else and yet being completely cognizant, completely adequate, in full control. Not amnesia, not psychiatric case, right? Because the more you're immersed, the more aware you are of your actual environment. It's a very interesting phenomenon. You don't actually forget that you're at the theater. You don't stop seeing audiences necessarily. Although we do have cases where great tragic actors transform to the degree that they forgot everything, right? But these were seconds, right? Let's be very clear. You can be completely cognizant, and the more you're aware of the fakeness of your surroundings, the more you're immersed in character and the imaginary circumstances that the character is living in. So that's the phenomenon of transformation. Obviously, it would be much better to experience it than to talk about it. But the last thing I want to say, Nolan, because you mentioned something, is that sometimes I became emotional on stage in my early training, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you became emotional, that actually means you transformed. It is the same thing. Emotions, feelings on stage in front of the camera, transformation, it's absolutely the same thing. Because unless you are using the horrible thing called emotional recall, when you're recalling some emotional moment from your own life, which will certainly take you out of the role, right? Mm-hmm. You are emoting, you are experiencing something, you're feeling something because you found yourself in the circumstances of the character. Therefore, you've become that character, right? Therefore, you're now in this character's shoes. Therefore, you have transformed. You have transformed, right? And another quick thing that I want to mention is that, again, Demidov demystifying things. There's a very important term by Stanislavski that everybody swears by, and that is I am. Right? It's an actor prepares. The real title of the book, of course, is An Actor's Work, right? But not everybody knows it as An Actor Prepares. I am. And everybody says, I am, I want to achieve the I am. I want to be in the state of the I am. I'm very sorry. I lived until, I was probably 50, right? Without understanding what the hell it means. Until Demidov said it very clearly. It means I am character. That's what I am means. I am character. But then comes that question, does it mean I adopted character towards myself? Does it mean I adopted myself toward character? What does it mean? I am character. It means I am character, the way that I am, right? I am character, that means I transformed. Or did I meet that character somewhere halfway? I think all three are possible, ultimately, and actors demonstrate it all the time.
There seems to be a reason that words like transformation and mask, for instance, have been cast away from some of the acting techniques as guilty. For instance, mask, which is used in different ways, the etymology acting-wise, but it seems to has been it's been guilty of, you're wearing a mask, you're hiding behind,
you're hiding behind a mask.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know what? Demidov reminds us that mask is the emblem of our art. And it is true, it is the symbol of our art. The crying mask, the laughing mask, right? I think there are two different types of masks. And one is the everyday transformation when we are wearing a mask. I'm talking to my superior because my superior wants to be the smartest one in the room. I am pretending to be dumb. I'm acting dumb, right? To cater to my superior. Then I walk in front of my students because my students want me to be a god, right? I pretend to be that god, right? Who is the smartest and all-knowing. So that is a very basic, and I would say very primitive way of transformation. And that's what acting teachers actually reject. when they're saying you're hiding behind a mask, you're wearing a mask. Unmask your voice, unmask your character, right? But they don't really want you to speak with your own voice necessarily, completely. They don't want you necessarily to, to be yourself, right? Because it's not going to fit the character. So how can your voice transform organically, naturally, without being masked? Well, it's all, again, the question of transformation. How can you transform organically without putting on a primitive mask of pretending to be someone else? There, that word imitation comes in, right? Mm-hmm. Pretense. I'm just pretending to be dumber. I'm just pretending to be smarter. I'm pretending to be younger. I'm pretending to be older. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, that exists. We do it in everyday life, therefore it should have some place on stage when our characters are doing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's legitimate overacting. Do you see what I mean? According to Demidov. Mm-hmm. It does belong, right? The character does it, that means that it should have place. However, transformation, of course, is something else. Transformation is not me just pretending to be someone else. So I think that's really the question. If that mask is genuine transformation, where I am achieving absolute freedom of confessing my innermost secrets that I would never be able to confess without being hidden under the guise, under the mask of my character, then it's a benevolent thing, right? If I am just acting like someone else, right, as we do in life, well, that's, of course, a very primitive thing. And then, yes, you are masked in a wrong way, but you can also be masked in a creative, artistic way. Mask as a liberating factor that allows you to say things about yourself and to become one of your facets that you perhaps in everyday life would never dare to confess that you have it inside you, among other things.
Mm-hmm. Andre, what? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking for people that are listening and they hear transformation and they hear, talking about typecasting, and of course, I think a lot of people when they hear talking about typecasting, they go to the opposite, which for them is method acting, and you're going to be living in your costume, and you're going to be horrible to your colleagues backstage and make them call you, your highness or whatever if you're playing a king, and all of that kind of trappings of that. And when I meet actors, they often, or when I meet non-actors, they often really think in that binary, that people are pretending or you're really going all the way and doing all that. How does the Demidov School feel, or how do we approach transformation, and does it involve any of that stuff?
You know what? To a certain degree, it does. I think because we are in an artistic profession. That means that our process is not 9 to 5. There are certainly jobs, right? There are 9 to 5 jobs, and at 5 p.m. I turn off. An actor cannot turn off at 5 p.m. When an actor is working on a character, because a lot of this work is conscious and the most of this work is subconscious. Therefore, when you're going about your day, when you are, meeting your loved ones, when you're having dinner, when you are tidying up your room, you obviously continue to work on character, only not consciously, but subconsciously. Therefore, you may be inadvertently rehearsing this character. And that's not your fault, and you're not trying to do it, right? You're actually doing it subconsciously. And certain things come out that are actually belonging to character. I'll tell you a story. I was rehearsing Miss Julie by Strindberg. And a student of ours, a very talented actor, was playing Miss Julie. She happened to be engaged to the actor who played Jean. Can you imagine that horrible thing, right? Because, in the play, of course, these two characters have a very, tempestuous relationship and very poisonous and horrible relationship. So anyway, but nevertheless, in life, she was happily engaged. And once she came to me, to my office, and said, "Andre, I'm so sorry." I said, "Why?" She said, I'm horrible. I know, I can't rehearse. I can't really, do the role. And it is because I'm depressed. I mean, in everyday life, I'm deeply depressed. I said, "Well, is something happening in your life?" She said, "No, everything is fine in my life." And I knew that she was happily engaged and everything. And then I thought for a second and said, do you think that you being depressed in your everyday life currently may have something to do with the role, the kind of role that you are playing? Because of course, Miss Julie is greatly depressed. She thought for a second and said, yes, absolutely. From that point on, she was continued to be depressed, and she was so happy about it because she knew that she is rehearsing Miss Julie in her everyday life inadvertently. What I usually advise when you're playing a role that is very uncomfortable, so to speak, right, taking you outside of your zone of comfort, is to warn your loved ones, because they're the ones who are going to be on the receiving end first and foremost. Just warn them. If you see me act not like myself, right, just please know that this is probably me inadvertently working on my role, right? Warn them, because otherwise they may or may not understand what the hell is going on in certain cases.
Yeah. So what I take from that, Andre, is that if I'm going to play Hamlet, I might get sad sometimes, but I don't have to buy a castle to live in just to work on the role.
No.
Okay.
No, you don't. You can keep. I mean, of course, if you have money to do it, go ahead and buy a castle, right? But actors usually don't. Some do. So yeah, definitely, you don't have to actually be doing the kind of things that Stanislavski never suggested. Of course, it's the so-called method actors who came up with it, right? Going through, trying to duplicate specifically, consciously, trying to duplicate the experiences of the role in everyday life, right? That is working on a role consciously. And that's the number one difference between Demidov and basically everyone else. Because everyone else believes to Stanislavski. How could Stanislavski be wrong? To the subconscious through the conscious, that you can only get to the subconscious creativity through conscious means. You have to start with conscious means. That's Stanislavski's motto that everybody encouraged, everybody, except Demidov, who says, oh, no, 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 directly to the subconscious, straight to the subconscious, from the first lesson, from the first second. Because if you're not doing it from the first second, from the first lesson, from the first moment of working on a role, it will never happen. Straight to the subconscious, directly to the subconscious, bypassing the rational mind. And that is a revolution in acting, ultimately. Because everybody else, I repeat, believes Stanislavski that the only way to the subconscious is through the conscious.
I do have a question, because we are essentially talking about typecasting. So typecasting, in the word, it has the word casting, which means, let's say, for instance, I, as an actor, I go once, twice, or three times to a casting director, or my calls are always for a very specific type. And before we move to any advice that you have, Andre, as a remedy for typecasting or for the traps that I, as an actor, am falling into typecasting, I'm wondering, is this transformation we're talking about, is it something that one can do in an audition? Or is an audition a very short frame that nobody can actually transform? I have to go as myself because that's my selling point. I need to be myself, and that's an advice I see over and over again. But is this, because I've seen transformation happen in very short, in Demidov, like etudes are very small, and we're going to talk about etudes maybe in another podcast, but I've seen transformation happen in a few seconds. So is transformation something I can do in an audition?
Yes, yes, but if you are playing your scales on a daily basis, if you are on a daily basis developing in yourself transformability, ability to transform instantaneously, then certainly it will work. If you are not working on transformability as part of your daily skills, then that skill will be like every other skill that is not regularly exercised, right? Sometimes you nail it, sometimes you don't. In terms of they're looking for you, right? Because, well, let's put it this way. If they called you in, then arguably they're looking for you. They're looking for something that they've seen you do before, right? But if you've come in and they don't know anything about you, then what are you going to do? Yeah, absolutely. You look a certain way, right? You act a certain way in everyday life. But everyday life is your circumstances. The role is someone else's circumstances. In someone else's circumstances, you would become a different person. Imagine yourself being born in a different time period. Is it still you? Yeah, maybe you, right? But imagine yourself now being born in a different time period in a completely different family that has nothing to do with you. Now imagine yourself being born in a completely different country, completely different socioeconomic background than yours, being raised differently. Now imagine yourself having completely different friends and surroundings that shaped you. Is it still you? And keep adding to it, right? And the moment will come where you will say, well, actually, I don't know if it's still me, except it is. You see? So if you really begin to adopt your character's circumstances, how can you not transform? You can only be yourself or be your type in your everyday life circumstances, in the everyday life circumstances of your life. You cannot be your type in or yourself, right? If this is what you're comfortable doing, how you're comfortable being. If we change the circumstances, and every new role is going to offer different circumstances, you can adapt them to fit your own life and your life circumstances, but then you're changing the role, then you're changing the play, then you are doing something that is actually a little bit of a crime against the author. And maybe that's what they want you to do, because they invited you. So I think it depends, right? It really depends on the circumstances under which this casting is going on. But I think you are still going to be the most effective if you approach it creatively, if you let your creative individuality, rather than your everyday persona or habitual persona or comfortable persona or persona that everybody expects from you, if you let your artist do the work, your creative individuality do the work, I think you will still perform the best at that audition.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense.
Auditioning is,
yeah.
let me add very quickly, is the most difficult thing of all, because the stakes are so high. I must get the role. There's so many people competing, right? I want to get cast. I want to impress. I want to be liked. I want to be the best. You see how it's taking you out of the shoes of the character and putting you more and more into the shoes of the actor? And your actor circumstances are so different from your character circumstances. There are similarities, of course, they're always going to be, but there are also differences. As a character, you're probably not thinking at the moment about being liked or, you know, getting a role or whatever it is, or maybe you're thinking about something similar, right? But it's difficult to merge the two. So how do I actually approach an audition as a performance, where all I'm doing is being this character in front of the audience, sharing it with the audience without obviously wanting to share anything? How do I make sure that my audition is not an audition? I think that's the number one goal and number one secret behind nailing it, and behind being able to maybe create a character in the audition, to kind of answer your question, Kimon, rather than just, you know, give them that version of yourself or your comfortable persona or your habitual persona, your beloved persona, as Demidov calls it.
If somebody took the route of Stanislavski, for instance, and I know some casting directors do, or some casting or teachers that kind of teach auditions and castings do, one of the advice they usually, sometimes, not everybody, but sometimes give is like, you have to make risky choices,
Mhm.
which is like from the conscious to the unconscious in a sense. And
Yeah.
our school kind of moves in a different way, moving towards the unconscious, how you kind of assign that role to you, or you kind of inhale that part and that text, and the character kind of comes out on its own in a sense, and
Yeah.
it plays you. You don't play it.
Yeah.
In a very magical way. But one of the fundamentals of the Demidov School is something called freedom.
Mhm.
And I wanted to play a clip to both of you that I found, and I think it's very, very interesting. It's an actor, Michael O'Neill, talks about how he shared the flight with Al Pacino, and Al Pacino talked about Guildwood, and he talked about how Guildwood was free now. And O'Neill didn't understand what Al Pacino was talking about. What does he mean he's free? But then he mentions that he saw that in McConaughey, and
Mhm.
I'm mentioning McConaughey because McConaughey was typecast for so many years
Mhm.
as the beach boy, the guy that's on a beach, surfer boy, things like that. And then obviously an amazing transformation in Dallas Buyers Club. And this actor mentions that he was free, and I want to play that clip to both of you if you allow me, and then
Mhm.
we can discuss about it.
Mhm.
So
I was on an airplane once with Al Pacino. I did a film called Sea of Love with him, and we were flying to Toronto to rehearse. And he was talking about John Gielgud in the film, and he said, he's gotten free. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew Pacino knew what it meant. And moreover, the way he said it, there was a sense of reverence about the notion that an actor had gotten free. Now, John Gielgud's been doing this for a long time, and so had Al Pacino. So the thing was, he was saying about his performance, he's gotten free. Well, I saw that on McConaughey. He was free. Any impulse, any thought, any movement, any moment, it was like, whew, he was free to do whatever came to him in that instant. Whatever he was playing off of, whatever preparation he had, he was utterly free with it. And I thought, we're into something special here. We're into something really special here.
when I heard that clip, it kind of reminded me of Demidov.
Yeah. The culture of freedom being the chief, or one of the chief cultures of the Demidov School of Acting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be so, so confusing for especially young actors when there's this sea of people sometimes using the same terms.
Oh yeah,
And I
everybody
think
says freedom, right? Yeah.
everyone says freedom. And I
Mhm.
think, so many schools, they talk about freedom. And I think Demidov, first of all, he leads you to it immediately. And you never go away from it. And so many schools, they talk about freedom, and then they want you to do all these things, these objectives, these super objectives, these tasks. And by the end of it, you're holding all this stuff. And I just, you feel so inhibited.
Yeah, and that is when they tell you, and now find freedom in it, and you're saying, how?
Yeah. And
You
then when
just restricted me every inch of the way, right? How on earth would I find freedom in my performance? And they tell you, well, that we don't know, but you have to do it.
yeah, it makes me think, the way you're saying that, Andre, makes me think of something you said before, where we're talking about circumstances and stacking those circumstances, and that leads to a transformation. And so many schools will also talk about that. But they'll say you'll adopt these circumstances, but they leave out how you adopt these circumstances.
Exactly.
And what happens
They leave
is,
out how to work with circumstances, just as they leave out how to cultivate freedom. Yeah.
so you end up analyzing circumstances instead of adopting them.
Yeah.
And that freedom, and then you get off the stage and someone says, oh, you made such great choices.
Yeah.
Such great choices. And I think that term, Kimon, choices, I think it makes me kind of sad. I think I want my only choice to be to get on the stage and then to let the play take me away. And then when I'm done, maybe I'll choose to have a beer or not. But those are the only choices I want for the whole night. Just those two.
At some point, I started saying there are no choices. There are only inevitabilities. For as long as it is a choice, it's not truthful. Because choice is I'm choosing. That means I'm divided. that means I'm devious. That means I'm strategizing. That means I'm not honest. Truth is whatever I feel in this particular moment, whatever I actually think in this particular moment, whoever I am and whatever I am in this particular moment without any choices. Inevitability, that's truth. Because truthful actor is never divided. They're not making choices. They're just living, period. And those actors who design their performances, not live, but design, build, the horrible translation of the second book by Stanislavski, building a character. Can you think about it? As if a character is an object that can be built, right? That completely betrays, right, the deep misunderstanding that is still out there. Building a character. Yes, if you're building a character, you're building it and you're making choices. If you are developing a character organically, there are no choices. It actually develops as human beings do, as plants grow, right? That oak made a choice to be an oak and not a birch tree, right? Because an oak choice is more theatrical, right? No, that oak did not make a choice to be an oak, right? So it's a very different situation where directors, actors, in Demidov, they're gardeners. They're not Almighty God that does the growing and that does the design, right? They're gardeners that help, that facilitate. That's the word that, another word I came up with, right? For a Demidov type process, I came up with the word facilitation, right? Which is very true to the spirit of Demidov. So you can certainly facilitate a character, but the character will develop based on who that character is in the play, in the script, nevertheless. And there'll be a lot of things out of your control, and thank God that they're out of your control, because if they were in your control, you would be playing your type, what you're comfortable with. And when things are out of your control, you surprise yourself with your transformation. That's art. That's real.
Well, maybe, since we've kind of come around on that topic, maybe we should, end just with the kind of thought of, Andre, for that actor who's getting typecast or thinks they're getting typecast right now, or who feels like they're stuck in their everyday persona, maybe they're already in a training program, or maybe they're, currently working and have an audition tomorrow. What can they do today? What can they do to start shaking off that, everyday persona, to invite, transformation? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say two things. If you are training, I think there is a period where actually learning to surrender to your type is a very good strategy for a period of time. Because, okay, if you radiate certain something, there's a story about Michael Chekhov and Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was a student of Michael Chekhov's, and she was actually dreaming of playing a Dostoevsky role. Imagine Marilyn Monroe dreaming of playing Dostoevsky. And so she was rehearsing with Michael Chekhov a Dostoevsky role. I think it may have been Grushenko from Brothers Karamazov. And Michael Chekhov kept watching her and then stopped her and said, "Were you just thinking about sex?" She said, "No, I wasn't. In fact, I was far from thinking anything like that." He thought for a second, and he said, "Oh, I see. You radiate sex." This is long before she's become Marilyn Monroe, the star, right? You radiate sex no matter what. The studios will catch up to it. They will use it. They will exploit it. And you will never get out of these kind of roles where you're a sex object, ultimately. She began to cry and say, "I don't want to play these same roles. I want to be an artist," right? So typecasting. And guess what happened? Of course, for the most part, unfortunately, Michael Chekhov's prophecy came through. But boy, was she good at that type. So first and foremost, Don't be afraid of being typecast. Embrace your type. Most importantly, surrender to your type to the utmost degree so that there's no other actor who is better at playing that type than you. There's nothing wrong with that either. As a certain stage in your development, and then begin to work on transformation, on genuine, organic, creative transformation, right? And of course, within the parameters of a podcast, we cannot talk about exercises, techniques, and so on. Demidov, in his school, as you know, takes you towards transformation from the very first day. From the very first day, you're already receiving through the Demidov etudes this total workout, and total workout can't not include transformation. It has to include transformation, right? So of course it happens. But does Demidov talk to you about transformation from day one? No, of course not. It would only scare you. It would only put a dogma, right, of transformation into your way and block your way toward transformation, because you are yet to experience what genuine transformation is. But already you're thinking about transformation. And of course, you're mistaking it for anything else rather than what it is, right? Demidov doesn't say transformation until much, much later in training, you see. And Demidov accepts your habitual persona for a while until you genuinely begin to transform, because you're growing in your training, and then Demidov is going to stay on you to make sure that you never slide back to constantly playing your habitual persona. There is a very smart tactic in Demidov, right? But I think that this is something that our listeners would want to sign up for the upcoming intensive that comes in the middle of October, right? And actually experience some of it firsthand, because our intensive will be dedicated to type and transformation, right? So I think that's the best thing to do, because otherwise we would be offering acting exercises outside of the context of daily training, right? And expertly guided training. And we don't want to do that, obviously, because that would be irresponsible. However, obviously, the moment comes when you have to get very technical, right? And we have to begin to practice and exercise and do your scales. And Demidov offers you scales that you can play independently that include, of course, transformation. But in order to master transformation, in my opinion, you have to master another culture of Demidov's, and that is the culture of surrendering and green lighting. Because transformation is an experience that comes to you every time you walk onto the stage. The problem is you stifle it because you don't know how to surrender to it. Do you follow me, guys? Right? So it's not something that is not within the actor's power already. Michael Chekhov was right that every actor desires transformation. Moreover, I would say that every actor transforms every time they walk onto the stage. The problem is they kill that transformation, or rather their habitual persona that is much better rehearsed and therefore much more resilient than that character that is just getting born, right? Their habitual persona stifles it because it feels that this transformation is an attempt at it. This is who I am, right? My God, somebody is attempting at me. I have to fight back, and habitual persona, your type, right, begins to fight back. It's understandable. It's a reflex that is much more powerful than this just bodying, just beginning to develop reflex of somebody else, some other person, right? So the well-rehearsed and well-practiced impulse, or rather reflex, stifles the one that is just being developed, and you end up playing the same you, the same persona, and your inimitable, different than you character is murdered. How to make sure that it survives, that's what we are teaching ultimately. But it has a lot to do with the kind of culture and the kind of technique that only exists in Demidov, and that is that of surrender and green lighting. Sorry, I know that you wanted me to offer concrete exercises, right?
No, that's better.
Instead, I'm. It's a downer. I understand. Yeah.
No, it's not. You know, it's not a downer because when you get to those places and when you get to experience those, like Kimon and I have, and maybe one day we can get into the structure of the training program that Kimon and I have gone through. But what you were talking about there in those exercises that we know so well, that there's such a joy and so much energy that comes to you when you're getting to work that way that it's not a downer at all because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'll finish my part with, because I told you the story of Miss Julie, this horrible, depressing play, right, that I staged once using the Demidov approach. It's a whole story. I kind of wrote a chapter in my book about it. That book is yet to be translated into English, but it will. So I was there for the end of the performance. I just walked into the theater as they were ending. And I was backstage. And after the applause, after the curtain call, I saw these two women, right, which is Miss Julie and her maid, Christina. I saw them walk out. There were tears streaming down their faces still. And yet they were all elated and happy and energized. That play is a roller coaster, right? It will kill anybody. And yet there they were, so elated and energized while still, having tears on their faces. I looked at them and said, aren't you tired? Aren't you exhausted? They looked at me and said, no, we could play that thing right now again. Can you imagine? Right, something that is supposed to leave an actor drained and depressed, right, and empty, actually achieved the catharsis. That's what Demidov can do. It can lead you to this ancient art of catharsis, where having lived through a tragedy, you rid yourself of grief, right, of tragedy, of pain, and you are elated, you are transfigurated, you are actually joyful. I think that's what you're talking about, Nolan.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely
is. The joy of transformation.
And what a beautiful note to end on for today. So let's leave it there. And to those of you who are listening, there's a lot more to come. There's a million questions I have about every topic we've touched on today. And we'll also include, wherever you're listening, some details about where to find out more about this work and how to even participate in it. Thank you both so much. And we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, Nolan. Thank you, Kimon.
Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you.